This week's Torah portion is Devarim, which means words. It's the first portion out of the book of Deuteronomy, and we get the name from the first verse in chapter 1, which says, "These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel." So words, this is where we get the name for this portion. And in Hebrew Bibles, Devarim is also the name or the title of the fifth book of the Torah, the fifth book of Moses. This portion covers Deuteronomy chapter 1 through chapter 3 and verse 22. So it's two and a half chapters, but we're only going to look at a few verses today. So let's remind ourselves of what's going on here in this book. Here we start off with Moses addressing Israel. He's addressing the generation who are going to be entering the land. And we see that in chapter 2 and verse 14. It says, "Now the time that it took for us to come to Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the brook Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war perished from within the camp, as the Lord had sworn to them." So that generation that sinned at the 10 spies, the bad report given by the 10 spies, all of these men, this adult generation has now passed away. And now he's speaking to the new generation. So let's get into it. Deuteronomy 1. "These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel across the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the Arabah, opposite Suf, between Paran and Topol, and Laban and Hazarot and Dizab." So it's interesting to note here, we're given a specific location of where exactly they're at and where exactly Moses is saying these words. Verse 2. "It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea." So Horeb is Mount Sinai. I'm not sure why, but in Deuteronomy, Sinai is called Horeb. But again, it's interesting to note this detail that's given because they're not in Kadesh Barnea right now. They're in this other place across the Jordan. But why is this detail given? Well, when they left Sinai or Horeb, after they received the Torah, it should have taken them 11 days to get to this place, and then they could have gone right in, or to get to Kadesh Barnea, and from there they could have gone right into the promised land. But this is the place where they sent in the 10 spies at Kadesh, or the 12 spies rather, and 10 spies came back and they gave a bad report. So this caused Israel to fear the people in the land. When they heard of the giants in the land, they got this bad report from the spies. They feared the people and they lost hope in God. This is seen as rebellion for them. Losing hope in God, their disbelief and their disobedience is rebellion. And we see that in Deuteronomy 9 and verse 23. It says, "When the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, 'Go up and possess the land which I have given you,' then you rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You neither believed him nor listened to his voice." So they didn't believe, they didn't obey. This was seen as rebellion. So this is brought in here. This detail is given to remind this new generation of what their fathers had done, and we're going to get a little bit more into that in a minute. Verse 3, "In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had commanded to give to them." So we're in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month. They're traveling through the wilderness, is almost over. They will cross the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and we read about that in Joshua 4:19 through 24. It's on the 10th day of the first month, so this is the 11th month, so they still have the 12th month to get through, and then 10 days into the first month is when they will cross into the land. So they still have a couple months here for Moses to give this discourse, for Moses to die, and they mourn for Moses 30 days before they enter the land. "Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had commanded him to give to them. Verse 4, after he had defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei. But we're getting these details about this recent event. Okay, Moses is speaking to Israel after the defeat of these two kings. And this is important. This is significant to this particular generation. Moses wants to emphasize this, and we're going to come back to that here in a minute too. Verse 5, across the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this law, saying, and we'll get into what he says here, but first I just want to bring to your attention. So the first thing that's brought up is the location of where they're at. The second thing that's brought up is the detail about the failure of the 10 spies, and then the consequence of the failure is complete. Okay, these guys are dead now. They are now in this new location. They're about to go in. It's what did it say in the 40th year, and then we get this detail about the victory of Israel defeating Og and Sihon. And then the location is reiterated. They're in the Jordan, in the land of Moab. So when Moses starts talking to them, he recounts what has happened. He reminds them that they were commanded to leave Horeb or Sinai. When they left the mountain, they appointed elders. This is chapter 1, 9 through 18. Then he gives the story of the spies and the bad report and how the people rebelled against God. And that is chapter 1, verses 19 through 46. And then they wander in the desert for 40 years. That's chapter 2, 1 through 23. And then the rest of this portion is about the defeat of Sihon and Og, these two great kings. The defeat of Sihon is from chapter 2, 24 through 37, and the defeat of Og is chapter 3, 1 through 20. So let's read these. Let's go through some of this description of this battle. Chapter 2, starting in verse 24, says, arise, set out, and pass through the land of Arnon. Look, I have given Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his land into your hand. Begin to take possession and contend with him in battle. This day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under the heavens, who, when they hear the report of you, will tremble and be in anguish because of you. Now let's skip down to verse 32. Then Sihon with all his people came out to meet us in battle at Jahaz. The Lord our God delivered him over to us, and we defeated him with his sons and all his people. So we captured all his cities at that time and utterly destroyed the men, women, children of every city. We left no survivor. And then we'll jump to chapter 3. Then we turned and went up to the road of Bashan, and Og, king of Bashan, with all his people came out to meet us in battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I have delivered him and all his people and his land into your hand, and you shall do to him just as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon. So the Lord our God delivered Og, also king of Bashan, with all his people into our hand, and we smote them until no survivor was left. We captured all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og and Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many unwalled towns. We utterly destroyed them, as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. But all the animals and the spoil of the cities we took as our booty. Thus we took the land at that time from the hand of the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan from the valley of Arnon to Mount Hermon. All the cities of the plateau, and all Gilead and all Bashan, as far as Salek and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og and Bashan. For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. It is in Rabbah of the sons of Ammon. Its length was 9 cubits, and its width 4 cubits by ordinary cubit. So we see here Og was a giant. 9 cubits, I think that's like 13 feet or so, and 4 cubits, it was about 6 feet. And so he was probably about 9 feet tall, 9 or 10 feet tall. This Og, he was a giant guy. Jump down to verse 21. I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So the Lord shall do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for the Lord your God is the one fighting for you. So God was fighting for them in this battle. And so we see the mention of what happened with the bad report of the 10 spies, and then the battle with these two great kings. And it all boils down to faith in God, trusting God. With these two great kings, we see that God was fighting for them. It was God that was fighting. They weren't fighting. They were actually doing the battle themselves, but God was the one, and it says in the scriptures that he was delivering them into their hands. Verse 2 and 24 says, chapter 2 and verse 24 says, I have given Sihon the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his land into your hand. And then in chapter 3 and verse 1, regarding Og, do not fear him, for I have delivered him and all his people and his land into your hand. So God is giving them to Israel, and they go in and they fight, and they are victorious in the battle. These were great kings, mighty kings who were known. Sihon had a great army. Og was a giant. He was a Rephaim. He was known as this really big guy, and also the cities were fortified. They had high walls and gates and bars, and then many other cities as well. And this is what we see also with the 10 spies. They came up against fortified walls. This is what they saw, but they melted when they saw these things. They were afraid. The 10 spies gave a bad report because they didn't believe in God. They were afraid. They didn't trust God. They pictured themselves alone in the fight against these giants, in the giants that they saw in the land, and they forgot about God. Let's jump back to Numbers 13 and verse 25. It says, when they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. And then they present the giant cluster of grapes, and I'm sure everyone's all amazed at this huge cluster of grapes. And they continue, verse 28, nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there, the Anakim, the giants. We saw giants there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. And at this point, you can imagine the people are in an uproar. The people are frightened, and they're probably crying out. And then verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. So Caleb believed God. Caleb understood that God was going to deliver them into their hands. Caleb believed that God was going to be the one fighting for them. I'm sure he is remembering what happened in Egypt with everything that happened with the 10 plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. And so he trusted, he believed in God. Verse 31. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. Well, of course they are. And of course you can't. It was an impossible situation. No, on your own, you're not going to be able to come against this large army, these large people, all these fortified cities and whatnot. You're not going to be able to overcome them. Yes, they are too strong for you. You can't do it. But this is where God wanted them. God wanted them to call on to him, to trust in him, and to know that he's going to be faithful when he said, I'm giving this land to you and you're going to drive these people out. This is where God wanted them. This is where God wants us. At the end of our rope, a place where we have to say, I can't, but you can. And I trust you. And I know that you can. If we live a life to where we can say that, hey, I can do it all, I don't need God, he can't use us. We need to be in a place where we have to say, Lord, I need you. I can't do it on my own. I'm at the end of my rope. I've tried everything that I could, and I know that I need you to help me, to do this for me. As I was going through this week, it reminded me of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, when Yeshua is talking to the crowds, and this is the first time that he speaks to the crowds. In verse 1, it says, when Yeshua saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and began to teach them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Poor in spirit meaning they can't do it themselves. They've lost spirit. They've lost heart. They've come to the end of themselves where they say they know that they can't do it. They need someone to help them. They need God to help them. And so they cry out to him. Again, this is the place where God wants us to be. He wants us to say that we can't do it. He wants us to rely on him and to be obedient.